Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Thunguri Wash Process Kenya from Switch Coffee. And there's a bag right there. And Switch, based out of Tokyo, Japan. And this is their second ever appearance on this channel, having recently reviewed the Girsi, a wash processed Ethiopian coffee. But truth be told, this is the one that caught my interest the most among their current offerings, as it's an SL28 SL34 combination with flavor notes listed of sweet candy, peach, and grapefruit. So all of those factors make this sound very much like my type of Kenyan coffee, and we will see if it lived up to those expectations, as this right here is day 34. And recipe we went with for this coffee was the same as our previous Switch review, which is our standard recipe, a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I also like this one best through the Chemex, which of course indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, this one's a little bit more developed than that Ethiopia was, but the roast profile we came up with for Switch was pretty much along the lines of it's a fair bit more developed than one of its contemporaries like Apollon's Gold, while at the same time also being a fair bit lighter than a place like Sweet Bloom. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 18, first impression, and the coffee was definitely Kenyan in nature, as it had that savory red fruit component right at the forefront, while being unsurprisingly bright at the same time. There was that listed grapefruit note. It was present in this coffee, and what I like to say with grapefruit is typically I either experience a fresh fruit or I experience a bitter component, and in this case it was a little bit more on the bitter side of things. So I could see the grapefruit, but mostly in this bitter aspect. So it left a decent first impression, but I definitely felt the best of this coffee was yet to come. Day 20 ran it through the Chemex and was already a better cup, as there was a lot more of the vibrant acidity toned down and more of the candied bright fruit sweetness. So the peach felt a lot more apt from this brew method, as I was able to get a lot more of that in this cup, while the savory aspect was present but complemented well by that stone fruit. Significantly better cup. Day 21 ran it through the April dripper, and the savory aspects were a lot more prominent again. So those two brew methods, April dripper and V60, really seemed to accentuate the Kenyan-like characteristics to the cup, as there was a pretty bright berry component to it with an additional herbal aspect. Those are the things I typically get the most with Kenyans, of course, that listed savory aspect, while at the same time being that kind of hibiscus herbal florality. Very much in line with the expectations, while a slight candied sweetness was present yet again, but nowhere near as pronounced as it was through the Chemex. Day 23 back through the Chemex, and wasn't entirely sure how to adjust the cup, as there was significantly less of the savory aspect with this unusual M&M-like finish. So this coffee was a little finicky at times. The listed grapefruit was a lot more present as the cup had cooled down, this time a little bit more in the fresh fruit manner, while the citric berry brightness was present yet again. Day 25, best day of the coffee to this point, and this was running it back through the Chemex, so I feel like I just didn't do a good job brewing it on day 23, as on day 25 there was a higher overall clarity to the cup, as it continues skewing in the bright sweet fruit direction, which was really pleasant, especially on this day. Candied bitterness was reminiscent of the listed grapefruit, so I could say it was like a candied grapefruit at time, and at this time being a little bit more sweet in that side of things was a nice positive, while the berry and peach components also felt a little bit more candied. So the cup was improving, at least I felt so, because this was a really nice day for this coffee. That being said, I couldn't replicate it from this point going forward, as on day 27, the cup seemed to have a little bit of consistency issues, as this time it remained a lot more on the citric side of things. And again, anytime I was brewing it through the V60, it really all of a sudden did a Jekyll and Hyde, as it ramped up a lot of the savory, well, I hate to say it, tomato-like aspects to the cup, as even now it's relatively moderate for a Kenyan. It's not the most savory Kenyan I've ever had, but at the same time the floral herbality is starting to increase incrementally, so I feel like the coffee was just kind of skewing a lot more in that direction in general. Day 29, not quite as impressive as it had been through the previous days. While it's still on the cleaner side of Kenyans, it's continuing to skew a lot more in the citric side of things, the acidic side of things, which is not necessarily my favorite aspect of Kenyan coffees, even though that's what Kenyan coffees are. The herbal florality is present yet again, and the peachiness is becoming a lot more faint, so it's becoming a lot more diluted and in the background. So that's what I was really trying to get the most of from this coffee, was the peachiness, but I felt like maybe that window had passed at this point. Day 31 coffee has perhaps slightly stagnated at this point, as there hasn't been much of a change. The Kenyan-like acidity is continuing to dominate the cup, becoming the most present and prominent component within it. The herbality continues to increase as well, so it's just becoming a lot more Kenyan in general. And what I was able to experience early on, that very candied fruit aspect to the cup, is not quite as present on this day. So I honestly feel like the best day of this coffee was day 25, and maybe it could have been earlier if I would have used the Chemex and utilized the Chemex a little bit more, but that might have been the peak for this coffee. At least that's the peak I found from this coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And a lot of level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness at a level 4, that's actually a big deal because I usually don't score a lot of Kenyans at that level 4 clarity, but this one's actually a really clean Kenyan for me anyway. And as I'm drinking this coffee right now after it's cooled down, when it gets like right at room temperature, that's when I feel a lot more of that candied aspect to the coffee. This is really sweet at this time, sweet in the candied sense, but it does take a little bit of time, as up to this point it had been a lot more Kenyan-like, a little bit more savory, and just a little bit more herbal, floral, as opposed to the candy. But now it just kind of tastes like candy, which is positive. Finish, level 4. That's standard for Kenyan coffees. I always feel like they reach minimum level 4 mark, so I don't think that there's too much there worth discussing. Sweetness level 4, that's really good though. I really like the sweetness, especially on that day 25 mark. Wonderful sweetness right there at that level 4 mark, and that's going to be a winner for Kenyans for me, is when you're able to reach that level 4 sweetness. So really nice there. Acidity level 4, also typical for Kenyan coffees. A lot of the reason I liked Sweet Bloom's Kenyan coffees in the past was because they weren't always the most acidic coffees. So it is there at that level 4 mark. I'm happy with it there. Citrus fruit level 4, I would say that the grapefruit that they have listed on here, probably the most pronounced characteristic to this coffee. And if it had maybe been in a little bit more fresh fruit of a manner, when it is, it tastes like peach to me. But unfortunately, it was a little bit more of the bitter grapefruit, so a little bit more of the bitter citrus. That's why the bitterness charts at a level 3 right there for me. But the most pronounced fruit characteristic in this coffee, berry fruit level 3. I still feel like it has a lot of that Kenyan berry component to it. Those bright kind of tart berries, what are they called? Currants that people like to describe Kenyan coffees to have. So they're present in the coffee. I feel like it's justified there at that level 3. Stone fruit, I'll be honest, I'm being a little generous. There were times it justifies that level 3. Honestly, it could justify that level 4 mark, but the peach is there. It's just a little bit more faint. My objective to try to pull this out a little bit more, make it the most dominant characteristic in this coffee, was a failed attempt, as I couldn't get it above that level 3 at a consistent manner. It was almost non-existent for me through the V60, just a lot more present, a lot more pronounced to the Chemex. See if there's anything else worth discussing. Body level 3, yeah, it had a fair bit of body, even brewed through the Chemex. It is a Kenyan coffee. Those typically tend to have that listed juicy body, so I agree with that. Florality, level 3, it oftentimes felt very much like hibiscus, so that's why the florality is there. That's why the savoriness is there at that level 3. But the savory being at a level 3 is good for me, because that means that it wasn't an overly tomato-like coffee. It was through the V60, but when brewed through the Chemex, it was toned down, and even then it was on the lower side of the level 3. Pertaining to the tomato-like aspect, it just kind of at that level 3 mark for the hibiscus-like aspect to the coffee. I don't think that there's anything else worth discussing in this tasting wheel. I feel like it's a pretty decent representation of what I was getting from the coffee most of the time. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, it was positive. It was on the better side of Kenyans I've had this year. I think what was interesting was you can actually kind of pick and choose how you want this coffee to go, because through the V60, through the April dripper, it was very much that kind of standard Kenyan coffee, the tomato-like Kenyan coffee. But when you're also brewing it through something else like the Chemex, it did strip away a lot of the savory aspects, and you were able to get a little bit more clarity, a little bit more just cleanliness and sweetness from the cup. So that's why I liked it, because this coffee was actually quite versatile. And for somebody that likes a very specific sort of sweeter, cleaner Kenyan coffee, then I was able to get what I was looking for a little bit more than I think I was expecting, especially after that first brew. So it's positive, but not necessarily my favorite Kenyan of the year. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. That's the nice thing about this one, is you can kind of pick and choose which way you want this Kenyan to go. So even if you liked a little bit more traditional Kenyan coffees, the one with the savory aspects to it, the really high brightness and acidity, then it has that. But at the same time, if you kind of want to tone those down a little bit, then you have that option as well. So somebody that likes a more versatile Kenyan coffee, but I think the most consistent themes throughout was the more bitter citric aspects to it. So that's definitely present, and that's what you look for in Kenyans, and this one has it in nice abundance. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you enjoyed the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Thunguri Wash Process Kenya from Switch Coffee. Thank you for watching.